Hi, I'm Ariel. The day my father vanished, I lost more than a parent. I lost my place in the only home I'd ever known. My stepmother changed the locks. My sister emptied the bank accounts. They said he left everything to them. And I was just the burden he didn't take with him. But 3 years later, at a family gathering they threw to celebrate their stolen success, he walked in, alive. What happened next? No one was ready. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it? I read every single comment. Now let me tell you the truth they tried to erase. I can still picture that last morning with Dad. The sun pouring through the kitchen window, the faint hum of birds outside, and the clink of his spoon against the coffee mug. It had been a normal Tuesday. Ordinary, even peaceful. I remember thinking, maybe things are finally calming down. That was my mistake. He sat across from me at the table, glancing out the window more than at his toast. His hair, mostly silver now, caught the light in a way that made him look more tired than usual. He kept fiddling with his old brass pocket watch, turning it over in his palm like he was weighing something. I didn't ask. I should have. Then, without warning, he placed the watch gently on the table between us. "Keep things grounded while I'm gone," he said. "You're stronger than you think." That was it. No follow-up, no explanation, just a nod and the soft sound of the front door closing behind him. He never came back. At first, I told myself it was just another of his retreats. He used to go off-grid for clarity, camping trips, silent getaways. But even those came with check-in calls. This time, silence. One day became 3, then 5. On the 7th day, we filed a missing person report. Lenore, his second wife, looked concerned for exactly 5 minutes before waving it off as an overdue mental reset. Her tone was far too casual for someone whose husband had vanished. "Harold was under pressure," she said over her evening wine. "I wouldn't be surprised if he just needed to disappear for a while." Camilla didn't say much. She just stared at the fireplace like it held answers, her face unreadable. She and I had never been close, not since high school. Something about the way she watched me in those early days made my stomach tighten, like she was already calculating something. The real blow came just 9 days after Dad disappeared. I walked into the office like usual. Stanford Innovations, the company Dad built from scratch. My role as COO had always been about loyalty, not ego, but that morning my badge didn't work. I stood there at the glass door, swiping again and again like the problem was the plastic, not the message it screamed, "You're out." Security met me in the lobby. I asked to speak with the board. They said the board had voted. Without me. Emergency restructuring. That was the phrase they used, as if I'd been a broken ceiling tile or outdated software. It didn't take long to find out who pushed the vote. Lenore, backed by her cronies on the board. And Camilla, now proudly titled Acting CEO. I hadn't even been notified. When I finally confronted Lenore outside the boardroom, she didn't blink. "This isn't personal, darling," she said, smoothing her silk blouse like this was just brunch drama. "It's just math. You're not the future. Camilla is." I wanted to scream, but all I managed was a cold stare. I walked into that boardroom anyway, thinking maybe reason would matter. But the moment I stepped in, security followed me like shadows. My words barely made it past the door before they were escorting me out. I caught one last glimpse of Camilla in Dad's chair, his chair, legs crossed, twirling the company's signature pen between her fingers like it was some cheap toy she'd just won at a fair. By the time I got back to my apartment, the narrative was already being spun. Online headlines painted a different story. Ariel Stanford steps down amid emotional turmoil. I sat there staring at the screen, watching my own name reduced to a headline I had no control over. They framed me like a grieving daughter too unstable to lead. All I wanted was to scream the truth, but no one was listening. That evening, I drove to Dad's house, the one on Birch Hill Road, the home he loved more than any vacation property or penthouse he ever owned. The place was dark, locked. I sat outside in my car for what felt like hours, gripping a photo from my college graduation. It was the last moment I remembered him looking genuinely proud. His arm was around me, his smile soft and sure. That photo felt like a lifetime ago. The night air was cold against the window glass as I leaned my forehead to it, trying to breathe, to think, to not fall apart. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, just one message. "He's not dead. Stay quiet. They're watching." I read it again. And again. My hands trembled. I looked around. At the empty street, the quiet trees, the stars above that didn't care about human lies. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever was happening, it was just beginning. I didn't move for a full minute after reading that message. I just sat in the driver's seat, parked on the side of the road in front of my father's old house, my fingers frozen around the phone like it might bite me if I tapped the screen again. "He's not dead. Stay quiet. They're watching." It wasn't just the words, it was the timing. 3 years of silence, 3 years of being gaslit, discarded, humiliated. Then that. I opened the encrypted messaging app again, hoping it was some elaborate hoax. But the message thread had already vanished. Not even the usual user deleted account tag. Just gone. My heart thudded hard against my chest. Was this a trick? A warning? A cry for help? My first instinct was to drive straight to the police, but then I remembered how that played out last time, Lenore painting me as emotionally unwell, Camilla's fake concern in the interviews, the board using it to claim I'd stepped down voluntarily. I wasn't walking into that trap again. Instead, I drove north. It was a 5-hour ride to the Vermont cabin, a place barely anyone knew about. Just me and Dad. We used to spend long weekends there hiking and talking about anything but work. He called it a pocket of peace, and I hadn't been back since he disappeared. I'd locked it up and let it sit, too full of memories and questions. By the time I arrived, the late afternoon sun cast a pale golden light through the trees. The porch creaked the same way it always had under my boots. I pulled out the old brass key, still attached to the faded leather tag that said, "Keep breathing," and unlocked the door. Dust hung in the air like ghosts. The place hadn't been touched, or so I thought, but then I saw it. On the kitchen table sat a folded copy of the Burlington Free Press. The date printed across the top chilled me. April 12th, 2 days after the day Dad disappeared. No one was supposed to know about this cabin. No one. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and scanned the room. Everything else seemed untouched. Except... I knelt beside the old floor vent near the fireplace. We'd hidden all kinds of things under there over the years. Notes, snacks, once even a turtle I'd rescued from the road. I pulled up the grate, reached into the darkness, and felt something soft. An envelope. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. Only half of it remained. The other half was scorched, as if someone had tried to burn it, and stopped. Inside, folded with surgical precision, was a partial document. I unfolded the paper slowly, careful not to tear the charred edge. It was the last page of a legal document, a will, my father's signature, a witness line, and right above it, "I hereby designate Ariel Stanford as sole successor to Stanford Innovations." I sank back on my heels, hands trembling. They'd told the media he had no will. Lenore even claimed it had burned in the fireplace during one of Harold's spiritual episodes. But this was real. My name, his hand, a secret buried under our feet. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the stiff cabin cot, staring at the ceiling, the envelope on my chest. I thought about every look Lenore had given me that year before he vanished. The hushed meetings, the forged signatures I'd dismissed as clerical errors, the speed with which they'd erased me. By sunrise, I was back in the car, and I knew exactly who I needed to call. Wyatt picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Ariel, is everything okay?" "No," I said, "but I think I just found the reason they buried me." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Where are you?" "Heading your way. You still live off River Point? Yeah, he said. But are you sure this is smart? I'm not sure about anything. But I need someone who knows how to follow a trail. It had been years since we'd spoken. Our breakup wasn't explosive, just the slow drift of two people choosing different wars. He left the corporate world. I stayed in it, but I trusted him. And right now, that mattered more than anything. He met me in his garage, converted into a tech den, monitors humming like nervous bees. He looked older, but steadier. I handed him the scorched will and watched his face tighten. He asked for a copy. I nodded. Then I told him everything. 3 hours later, Wyatt had accessed the company's cloud backups, archived files from the month before Dad's disappearance. He compared the board meeting notes released publicly to the ones stored internally. The differences were subtle until they weren't. There, he said, pointing to a set of lines that had been digitally altered. They erased your voting rights from the record. See this log? The metadata says it was edited 2 days after Harold went missing. By who? He hesitated. What? I pushed. The access point used a temporary IP routed through the Cayman Islands, but I found a second ping. It was routed through an email registered to Camilla. I felt like the air had been punched out of my chest. Camilla, my father's second daughter, always the peacemaker on the surface, always smiling, never raising her voice. And yet, she'd been in contact with offshore consultants within 48 hours of our father disappearing. Wyatt continued, It gets worse. That email account was set up months before his disappearance. I didn't speak. My hands curled into fists at my sides. It was becoming clear. This wasn't a sudden takeover. This was premeditated. We worked late into the evening, digging deeper. When I finally left his place just after 9, I didn't go home. I headed instead to a retirement community 30 miles outside the city. Mr. Gentry opened the door in a worn cardigan and khakis. His face, lined with age, softened when he saw me. Ariel, he said, it's been years. I need to ask you something, I said quietly. About my father. He stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. Over weak tea and an old jazz record playing low in the background, I asked him what he remembered. He was worried toward the end, Gentry said. Said he felt watched, said things didn't add up. Did he say anything about Camilla? Or Lenore? Gentry's brow furrowed. Only that he was drafting changes. Said he'd made mistakes trusting the wrong people. Said you had more spine than the rest of them combined. I blinked, trying to hold it together. He told me, Gentry added, if anything ever happened to him, it wouldn't be an accident. And just like that, the world tilted under my feet. I didn't speak for several minutes after Mr. Gentry said it, just stared at the dust motes swirling in the streak of light from the window, like maybe one of them carried the last breath my father took. He'd said it wouldn't be an accident. And now, looking back, nothing about that week had ever made sense, just layers of noise designed to keep me quiet. The week they said he died started in panic and ended in confusion. Lenore had called me in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, voice trembling with just enough emotion to sound real. There's been an accident, boating, Maine. They're still searching. I'd dropped everything, drove 6 hours north without sleep, hands locked to the wheel like the leather would crack if I let go. But when I got there was no Coast Guard, no search party, just Camilla sitting on the porch of a lodge rental, sipping from a metal travel mug, her eyebrows drawn together, not in grief, in calculation. They said a wallet had washed ashore, burned, some fabric that might have been from his jacket. The watch, melted beyond recognition. That's all they found. No body. No report from Maine State Police. Just a single-page summary Lenore handed me like it was a grocery list. He wouldn't want us dragging this out, she said flatly. Let him go. I'd looked her dead in the eye and asked, but what if he's still out there? What if this is a mistake? Camilla's voice was the one that rose. You always make everything about you, Ariel. He's dead. Stop clinging to fairy tales. And I did stop. I curled into myself, Sat through a memorial service with people in crisp suits I didn't know, in a rented hall that smelled like lemon cleaner and stale coffee. Then came the night of the reception. I was still in the black dress from earlier, sitting on the back patio steps of the house I grew up in, knees pulled tight to my chest. The sun had just dipped below the trees when Camilla walked out. She was holding a folder. "I didn't want to do this now," she said, voice syrupy with fake sympathy, "but things need to be handled." She opened the folder, showed me a paper with my father's signature. "It's a transfer of guardianship. He handed over all assets to Mom, effective immediately. This was notarized just a week before he passed." I stared at her. "That's impossible. He told me the opposite. He said I'd be executor." Camilla shrugged. "Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he realized who he could trust." Then she added, almost like she was throwing in a weather update, "Also, the accountant flagged some irregularities. Checks. From Dad's account. Your name's on a few." That's when it clicked. They weren't just taking the house, they were taking the narrative, painting me as a fraud, someone greedy enough to steal from her dying father. "You're out tonight," she said simply. "I already called a locksmith." And she did. I wasn't even allowed back inside. A neighbor brought out a cardboard box with my name scrawled on it in permanent marker. Inside were my high school trophies and 2 dresses. No photo albums, no journals, just a note on top. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." For a long time, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I was the one who'd read too much into things, missed some subtle moment of estrangement. But now, with Mr. Gentry's words echoing in my head, I couldn't pretend anymore. I drove back to my tiny rental just before midnight. On the way, I called Wyatt. He answered on the 3rd ring, groggy. "Couldn't sleep?" he muttered. "No," I said. "Can we meet tomorrow?" There was a pause, then a soft sigh. "Yeah, come by the lab." By noon, we were sitting in his cluttered office, screens glowing, server stacks humming like 1,000 whispered lies. He pulled up archived emails from my father's company address. "This is from a week before he disappeared," Wyatt said, scrolling. At first glance, it looked normal. Company jargon, budget approvals, staffing updates. But it didn't sound like my father. The tone was off, cold, robotic. Every sentence signed, "Sincerely, Charles," like he was writing to strangers. Wyatt clicked into the metadata. "Whoever sent these, they spoofed the server. The real IP is masked. It's not from your dad's location." I leaned in. "So someone pretended to be him?" "Looks like. And here's the worst part. Check this one." He opened an email dated 2 days after the supposed accident. It was a confirmation, approving the new board composition and relinquishing voting rights. All legalese, all designed to erase me. I couldn't breathe for a moment. "They buried him with lies," I said quietly. Wyatt didn't say anything, just clicked to close the window, his jaw tight. I left not long after. Needed air, needed distance. That evening back in Vermont, I went to the cabin again. My father's old retreat in the woods, one of the few places they hadn't gutted or sold. I was pacing when I noticed a frame on the wall, crooked, barely hanging. Behind it, duct taped to the drywall, was an old flip phone. I charged it. Waited. When the screen finally lit up, there was one draft message saved. It wasn't sent. Just sitting there, open, half-written. "If anything happens, don't trust them, especially not her." Then it stopped. No signature, no name, no date. Just that final line hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that burned too fast. Her. Not Lenore, not Camilla. Or maybe it was, but something in me whispered there might be someone else, and that meant the story wasn't over, not even close. I didn't sleep that night. After reading my father's draft message, unfinished, tense, haunting, I just sat there. The rain had slowed to a whisper against the cabin roof, but my thoughts moved like floodwaters. He'd tried to warn me. Someone had interrupted him. And now, even in death, he was still being silenced. I leaned back into the old couch by the stone fireplace, letting the weight of the silence fill the room. It wasn't just about who her was, it was about everything they'd erased, everything I'd given up without even realizing I was bleeding. Before everything spiraled, before Camilla and Lenore took over, I had a life that felt like mine. I wasn't just my father's daughter, I was his partner. We worked together in research and development, applying for FDA grants, writing compliance protocols, designing systems that would make the company not only profitable, but ethical, sustainable, something that could actually help people. I remember how proud he looked when I got our first NIH approval. "That's the future," he told me. "That's you." Now, you'd never know I was there, or that he was. I visited the foundation's website again, eyes narrowed. The history page once had a photo of my father shaking hands with university partners, another with me at a public health forum in D.C. Now, nothing. Just Lenore's smug quote about vision and perseverance, and Camilla's curated face under next-generation leadership. No trace of the man who built the company from his garage, or the daughter who followed him into the lab every Saturday morning. They didn't just steal our company, they rewrote it like we were never in the room. That realization broke something open. I stopped feeling sorry and started taking inventory. It was nearly noon when I met Wyatt in town. He brought coffee and a spark of energy that I couldn't fake anymore. "There's someone you need to meet," he said, leading me through a tucked-away law office near the post office. The woman behind the desk was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, and firm in her handshake. Her name was Maria Campos, retired notary. She looked me over once and said, "You're his daughter." I remember now. Wyatt sat beside me as she pulled out a battered leather-bound logbook. "Years ago," she began, tapping her nail on a date, "these two women came in, said they needed emergency notarization. One of them did most of the talking, thin, angular face, blonde. The other one hung back, younger, brown hair, eyes that didn't stop watching." My mouth dried. Lenore and Camilla. "They brought a man with them, said he was John Vale." She paused. But he wasn't. Not the man I'd seen at Rotary events or fundraisers. This guy had a scar that looked fake, like theater makeup, and he signed with a left hand that trembled the whole time. Maria had questioned it, asked for ID, they waved a passport. She only got a glimpse. "It was off," she admitted, "but they were pushy, and I regret not pushing back." I swallowed hard. That signature, the one they used to strip my father's authority, was a fraud, built on theater, intimidation, and a notary's lapse in judgment. Back in the car, I held my breath for a long time. Wyatt reached over, squeezing my hand. "Do you still think you're powerless?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. Not yet. The next morning, something arrived in the mail at the cabin. No return address, just a thick ivory envelope embossed in gold. Inside, an invitation. The Vale Family Business Gala, celebrating vision, legacy, and innovation. And there they were, in full color. Camilla, all designer charm and poised confidence. Lenore beside her, her expression soft and matriarchal. Below them, a quote in cursive gold script, "Without vision, a company dies, and without unity, it never begins." John Vale. My chest clenched. My father never said that. I knew his tone, his principles. He would never justify betrayal with unity. I nearly ripped the invitation in half. But on the bottom corner, a line caught my eye. "This event will be live-streamed globally. Tune in at..." I set it down slowly. If they wanted a stage, maybe it was time I gave them a show. 2 days later, I was back at the Vermont cabin, alone, focused. The dining table was covered in papers, files, screenshots, printouts, and a laptop that barely kept up. I sorted the mess into piles: emails from his account, suspicious ones with strange phrasing, copies of notarized documents with inconsistent seals, a copy of the notary's log, a list of dates, my own calendar from 3 years ago, text messages, my father's last voicemail, the draft message he never sent. I taped everything to the wall, index cards under each one, drew red lines between them with a dry erase marker like some homemade FBI movie. At the center, a date circled in black, 3 years to the day. That's when the first fake email went out. That's when the foundation quietly removed his biography. That's when Camilla's press campaign started, and I got that eviction notice. That's when they buried him, maybe not in a casket, but under enough lies to make people forget he ever existed. But I hadn't forgotten, and I wasn't done. I traced the date with the tip of my pen once more, then closed the binder and leaned back. For a long moment, I just listened to the wind rattling against the old cabin windows. 3 years to the day. Everything pointed to this gala, not just as a celebration for them, but a reckoning for me. I left before dawn the next morning. The air was brittle with cold, even though spring had technically arrived. As I drove through the Vermont backroads, I kept repeating it in my head like a mantra. No more silence, no more fear. I wasn't going to that event to beg. I was going to end the performance once and for all. The venue stood like a marble cathedral to money, one of those historic hotels in Boston that smelled like old cigars and polished wood. The ballroom was already glowing when I arrived, despite the sun just beginning to dip. I parked a block away. I didn't want to be seen stepping out of a dusty sedan when the rest of them were pulling up in town cars and limos. Inside, everything gleamed. Gold-trimmed pillars, champagne flutes, velvet napkins folded like origami. A jazz quartet played near the stage, smooth and calculated like everything else here. Waiters weaved through clusters of donors and board members. I spotted a few old faces, people I remembered from my father's time. Most of them had aged out of relevance but clung to their invitations like social currency. I stayed near the back, unnoticed. That was the plan. Then I saw Camilla. She stood under a spotlight dressed in a metallic gown that shimmered every time she turned. Her hair was swept back tight, her lips stained in that signature blood wine red. Her voice was soft but practiced, flowing through the speakers with all the polish of a TED Talk. "We're not just here to celebrate a company," she said, hand over her heart. "We're here to honor a legacy, one built by strong, fearless women." The crowd applauded, and she paused long enough to drink it in. My eyes traveled to the brooch pinned at my collarbone, my mother's. A small touch, but deliberate. A quiet reminder that she'd mattered, that she'd been here. Camilla went on about innovation, vision, and empowered leadership. She never once said my name, or our father's. Then Lenore took the stage. Compared to Camilla, Lenore looked stiff. Her words didn't roll. They bumped, like she was reading from cue cards someone else had written. "We'd like to take a moment to honor our late father, John Vale," she said, gesturing toward the screen behind her. The room dimmed. A slideshow began. Photos of him, cherry-picked and curated, him shaking hands at events, him standing beside Lenore and Camilla, but always with his face blurred slightly, as if distance had settled into the pixels. Then her voice broke. "As many of you know, our father passed unexpectedly 3 years ago while traveling overseas. His plane went down in the Alps. His remains were never recovered, but his spirit lives on in every venture we build." I stared at the screen as they showed a candlelit photo with the caption, "In Memoriam, John Vale, 1952, 20-20. My fingers tightened around the edge of my clutch. I could hear the champagne fizzing nearby, the rustle of expensive fabric shifting in seats. I didn't blink, didn't breathe. Camilla wiped under her eye delicately, like a woman in a soap opera mourning someone she'd poisoned 2 scenes earlier. A voice next to me murmured, "So tragic." I couldn't hold it anymore. I stepped forward, quietly at first, past the last table, then past the bar. The carpet softened each step. The stage grew closer. Lenore was still talking, thanking the audience for carrying on his vision. Then I reached the mic. My hand lifted slowly, almost trembling, but not from fear. I tapped it twice. It buzzed to life. Heads turned. Someone near the front whispered, "Is that funny?" I said. My voice echoed across the ballroom, carried by perfect acoustics. "Because I just spoke to my father last night." Gasps spread like wildfire. One man dropped his glass. A woman's hand flew to her chest. Camilla's face went flat, then rigid. Lenore's jaw moved like she was about to speak, but nothing came out. Security started toward me. Not a full rush, more like a cautious approach, as if I were holding something more dangerous than a voice. Camilla reached for the soundboard. "Cut it," she hissed. Too late. From the back of the ballroom, a slow ripple began. A few heads turned, then more. He was walking in, hair gray, thinner than before, shoulders hunched slightly. But he still moved like a man who built things with his hands, still wore the same worn shoes, the old corduroy blazer. John Vale. Alive. The crowd turned fully now, some standing. A camera flash went off, then another. Camilla took a step backward. Her wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered, sharp and small. He walked up the center aisle slowly, eyes on the stage. When he reached the front row, he paused. "Well," he said, adjusting his cuffs casually. "Looks like someone threw a funeral I wasn't invited to." The room exploded. For a split second, no one moved. Then, all at once, the entire ballroom came alive. Chairs scraped, cameras clicked, gasps rolled like thunder. But I couldn't look at them. I could only see him. My father. He was thinner, grayer, but very much alive. And real. Not ashes in the Alps. Not a photo on a fake memorial wall. He walked slowly, his left hand trembling as he reached for the edge of the podium. I stepped forward, my heels clicking across the parquet floor like gunshots in the silence. When we finally met at the base of the stage, neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. His arms wrapped around me like they'd been aching to do so for years. I buried my face into the shoulder I thought I'd never feel again. "You found me," he whispered. "No, Dad, you found us." The moment only lasted seconds before the tension snapped. "What is this?" Camilla hissed, stepping forward with practiced poise but a tremble she couldn't quite hide. "Is this some kind of elaborate trick? Because if it is, it's tasteless, even for you, Ariel." My father turned his gaze toward her. He didn't blink. "I was silenced," he said calmly, "declared dead, with documents filed in my daughter's name, documents she never signed." A flurry of murmurs burst behind us. I looked back. Most of the guests were on their phones, Googling, filming, texting. But I focused on Camilla. "You used me," I said. "You forged my signature." She let out a small laugh. "Ariel, be serious. Why would I do something like that? You were grieving. We all were." Lenore hadn't spoken. She just stood there, face pale, knuckles white around the glass she held too tightly. My father reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded document. "This," he said, raising his voice, "is the notarized death certificate, filed in Massachusetts. With this woman's signature," he pointed to me, "used without her knowledge. Filed by this one," he looked at Camilla, "alongside a lawyer who has since lost his license." The room started spinning, not from dizziness, but fury. I remembered that day like it was yesterday, the day they threw me out. The only thing they let me take was an old briefcase of my father's. I'd thought it was empty. It wasn't. It had his original succession documents tucked inside the lining, the ones that named me as the next managing trustee of the family foundation, not Camilla. "You made me think I wanted him gone," I said. "You made everyone think I was complicit in burying a man who wasn't even dead." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Camilla snapped. "You were gone, lost in your own world, grief-stricken and fragile." I stepped toward her. "No, I was erased. You didn't want my grief. You wanted me gone so you could run everything without consequence." Her voice sharpened. "You always had to make it about yourself, Ariel. Maybe if you'd actually cared about the family." "I cared more than you ever did." Before she could respond, I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and tapped to open a file. The audio was crackly at first, but unmistakable once the voice came through. Well, if John were out of the picture, technically, the succession wouldn't default to Ariel, unless she contests, but only if she finds out the will was changed. Camilla's eyes flicked toward Lenore in slow, horrified recognition. The room froze. "Who recorded this?" Camilla spat. I looked straight at Lenore. "You were careless. I had my phone in my purse. I never meant to record it. But you kept talking." Lenore's hand shot out toward me like she meant to snatch the phone, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare." "You don't know what you're doing," she shouted. "You're destroying everything." "No," I said, voice calm. "I'm finally setting it right." Camilla let out a laugh, dry and mean. "This is a circus, and the only clowns here are the ones trying to act like victims." My father suddenly slumped slightly, a hand going to his chest, his face contorted, not in rage, but pain. I turned immediately, reaching out. "Dad?" He tried to wave it off, but then stumbled. I grabbed his arm, feeling the weight of him sag into mine. "Someone call an ambulance!" I cried. But Camilla didn't move. She looked at him and muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "He's faking it again, just like last time." The silence that followed wasn't just stillness, it was judgment, suspicion, and it turned like a spotlight right onto her. Silence. Everyone turned toward her. Camilla crossed her arms and tilted her head, unfazed, like she'd rehearsed this moment for years. "Oh, come on," she said dryly. "He staged the whole thing. This is classic John, melodrama and manipulation. He always needed an audience." I looked down at my father, still clutching his chest, breath shallow but steady. The paramedics we'd called hadn't arrived yet. My mind raced with questions, but his eyes, those eyes, remained locked on Camilla. Then he spoke, quiet but unshaken. "Camilla, I know what you did. I know who helped you." She blinked, just once, her jaw stiffening. For the first time, she didn't have a quip ready. John reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, the edges frayed, cover worn and sun-faded. He opened it, thumbing through pages filled with shaky handwriting. "This is my record," he said. "My memory. I wrote every day, even when they sedated me, even when they told me I didn't exist anymore." I stepped closer. "Where were you, Dad?" His voice cracked. "A facility. In the hills outside Puerto Vallarta. I was taken there against my will. Papers said I was unstable, dangerous, that I threatened my family." He looked up at Camilla. "You signed those papers." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. He continued. "They kept me locked away for years. A doctor, God bless him, finally questioned the paperwork. The court order had expired, and when he tried to reach my family, no one picked up?" My breath caught in my throat. "You mean, you never left? You were committed?" John nodded. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me a folded document, yellowed at the creases. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling. At the bottom of the page, just above the seal, sat a signature, my name. But it wasn't mine. It was my handwriting. Or at least, it looked like it. I looked up at Camilla. "You forged my signature?" she finally scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic, Ariel. You think you're the first person to misunderstand a complicated situation?" I turned the page around and pointed to it. "You made it look like I wanted him gone." "You never asked questions," she spat. "You wanted your little art studio and your quiet life. You left the business to me, remember?" Someone in the crowd gasped. The murmur began to ripple through the guests. Phones were already out, recording, whispering. A woman near the buffet whispered, "This is going viral." Camilla snapped, "If I see a single video online, I will sue every last one of you. Don't test me." I ignored her. My eyes found Lenore's. She stood frozen, arms limp at her sides, eyes wide with guilt. "You let them erase him," I said softly. "You let them erase me. For what, Lenore?" She looked away, lips trembling. You were never meant to be part of the plan." There it was. The words felt like knives, quiet but precise. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded, as if my body already knew what my heart couldn't yet process. John steadied himself on the podium, journal still in hand. His voice regained its strength. "You all forgot something. Something I made sure stayed buried deep." He glanced toward me. "Ariel, do you still have that briefcase I gave you?" I blinked. "The old one? From your study?" He nodded. "Did you ever open the inside pocket?" I hadn't. He turned to the crowd. "Inside that briefcase is a key, and in the company archives is a second safe. One that holds the original trust documents, never nullified. That trust gives her 51%. All eyes turned to me. I felt the breath leave my lungs. Camilla's voice was sharp. "That's a lie." "It's notarized, dated, and witnessed by a third party who has already submitted a statement," John said calmly. Lenore stepped backward, nearly bumping into a server. Her face had lost all color. John looked at me. "You're the majority shareholder, Ariel. Always have been. They just buried it." I took a step forward. "Then it's time we dig it up." Camilla opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her hands clenched. Her chin trembled, just slightly. John turned back to the crowd. "I've already filed the motion to reinstate Ariel as the controlling shareholder." Gasps echoed again, louder this time. Several guests clapped, unsure whether it was appropriate. Others simply stared. John straightened his shoulders. "Now," he said, his voice steady and clear, "let's talk about restitution." The murmur settled. John's words still floated in the air like smoke from a long-buried fire. "Now let's talk about restitution." 2 weeks later, I stood at the courthouse steps in a dark navy suit. Not a power move, just a quiet assertion. John was beside me, calm but alert. The press had gathered, their cameras discreet for now. I didn't glance at them. I focused on the sound of our heels clicking up the steps, the weight of years finally moving toward a reckoning. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Camilla sat across the aisle with her attorney, arms folded tightly, jaw clenched. Lenore, though present, kept her gaze lowered. I could almost smell her fear under the perfume. The air felt sharp like winter sun on glass. The hearing opened without fanfare. The charges read like a cruel resume: fraudulent institutionalization, embezzlement, defamation, and conspiracy to defraud. Each word landed like a stone on the polished floor. I stayed still. When the clerk read my name as co-plaintiff beside John, a few heads turned. I met no one's gaze, just stared straight ahead. Our attorney, a sharp but soft-spoken woman named Elise, stood and opened the first folder. She started with the financials. Years of buried paper trails traced through shell companies that all funneled, eventually, back to Camilla. Elise laid out the spreadsheets like a quilt of greed and betrayal, one document at a time. Camilla's attorney objected. He called it circumstantial. The judge waved him down. Then Elise opened the second folder. "We'd like to admit into evidence an audio recording from 2019, captured on a smartwatch belonging to Mr. John Albright." She glanced toward Camilla. It was a gift, from his wife. The courtroom hushed. The clip played through the courtroom speakers. First, silence. Then Lenore's voice, measured but icy. "Once he's gone, we split the company. Just make sure the girl never gets in." A gasp rippled through the benches. Reporters shot glances at each other. Camilla's face didn't twitch, but her eyes burned holes into the table. She rose quickly. "This is entrapment. That recording was illegal." "Overruled," the judge said, not even looking up. I felt my spine go rigid. Not out of shock. I had heard the clip before, but because this was the moment it stopped being personal vengeance and became public history. The room now knew. And once you know, you can't unknow. Camilla's attorney whispered something frantic in her ear. Her lips pressed into a tight line, but she sat. Lenore, on the other hand, shifted uncomfortably. Then she stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to clarify something." The judge raised a brow. I only signed what Camilla told me to. I never understood the full plan. I was misled." Camilla turned toward her, eyes wide with disbelief. "You followed every order. You called the notary. Don't you dare walk away now." You told me it was temporary, Lenore hissed. You said he'd be safe. And you didn't question any of it? I couldn't hold it back. My voice was calm, but the words stung. You helped disappear a man. You helped erase his name. And mine. The judge slammed the gavel. One more outburst from any side and I'll clear this room. We sat. But my pulse didn't. The next hour went fast. Evidence rolled in like a storm tide. Bank transfers, video logs from the facility in Mexico, old emails John had managed to send but never got replies to. The walls these women had built around their lies were crumbling, brick by incriminating brick. At the end of the day, the judge called for a recess. Everyone stood, stretched, murmured. I stayed seated. I knew the real decision was already forming behind his neutral expression. 2 days later, we reconvened. The courtroom felt more solemn, heavier. The judge's ruling came crisp, direct. This court finds sufficient evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and wrongful institutionalization. All corporate assets diverted are to be returned. The original trust, granted to Ms. Ariel Albright, is reinstated, effective immediately. Ms. Albright is recognized as the legal CEO. The courtroom was silent, save for a few scattered breaths. No cheers, no outbursts, just the kind of stillness that wraps around a new beginning. I stood. The judge nodded toward me. I cleared my throat, not to speak louder, but to hold back the tremor that wanted to rise. I was told I was invisible. I was written off as sentimental. But I rebuilt quietly, and I watched, and I waited. I won't disappear again. From the back row, a former employee raised his hand in a small, almost reverent clap. Others followed, soft, restrained, but powerful. The bailiff gestured toward Camilla and Lenore. You're being escorted now. Camilla walked stiffly. Her heels clicked, but she didn't look down. Just as she reached the door, she stopped. She turned slowly, deliberately, and stared at me with a gaze I couldn't read. There's still one thing you don't know, she said, her voice low but razor-sharp. I froze. John's expression changed. The blood drained from his face, his jaw clenched. What does that mean? I asked, but she was already being led through the doorway. A burst of camera flashes followed her exit. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not yet. Because something had shifted in that moment, and I could feel it, heavy and real. There was still one more secret buried, somewhere, waiting. There's still one thing you don't know. Camilla's voice echoed through the courtroom hallway as 2 officers flanked her. She turned her head, eyes gleaming, not with victory, but desperation. I sold part of the company, she spat, months ago, to a silent partner. You think you won? You've only got half the power. Her smirk was short-lived. I took a slow step toward her, locking eyes, my tone quiet but firm. I know, I bought those shares back weeks ago, through a trust. You signed the transfer papers yourself, didn't even read them. Camilla blinked. Once, twice, then the reality hit her like a wave. Her knees buckled slightly and the smirk crumbled. Her lips parted but no sound came out. The officers gently took her arms, guiding her away. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I let the silence settle, sharp and final. That night, back at my apartment, the quiet was different. It wasn't hollow anymore, just calm. The next morning, John asked if we could meet. I almost didn't respond, but something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, said yes. We met at a small park just off the edge of town. It was quiet, save for the faint hum of lawnmowers and the occasional dog bark in the distance. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe just tired. He held a small thermos in his hands like it was a shield. I used to bring you here, he said, settling onto the bench. When you were 4, you'd chase squirrels and try to name every tree. I didn't respond. I waited. I made a mess of things, he finally said. Not just the business. Us. You. I let fear and pride drive too much of what I did. When your mother disappeared, I clung to control like it was oxygen. His voice cracked a little. You didn't deserve to be shut out. I looked at the gravel near his feet. You didn't even ask if I was okay. I know. He took a long breath. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted to say it, to your face, that I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. No tearful embrace. Just two people, broken in different ways, trying to stitch together something honest. I didn't say much in return. Just nodded once. You were gone, I murmured. So I became who I had to be. He nodded back. And she's remarkable. A week later, I stood in the ruins of our old home. The fire had eaten through most of it years ago, but the contractors had stabilized what was left. Now it was being restored, not as a replica but a redesign, a rebirth. As I stepped over the threshold, boots crunching on plywood and scattered nails, something caught my eye. A box, taped shut, labeled in my father's handwriting, "For her." Dust caked the lid, but the tape was still sealed. I opened it carefully. Inside were old drawings, my childhood sketches, floor plans made with crayons, fantasy mansions drawn beside the family dog, whole cities imagined with corner shops and tiny parks. At the very bottom was a folded paper, the ink smudged from time. I kept these, the note said, even when I didn't know how to keep you. I stood there for a long while, holding the sketch of a house shaped like a seashell, my 8-year-old dream. 2 days later, I walked into the company headquarters, my company now, and stepped onto the press room floor for my first public address. Flashes clicked as the room filled, reporters, former employees, stakeholders. I took my place behind the podium, the logo gleamed behind me, renewed, redefined, and beside it a wall had been installed. Portraits of the original founders lined its surface, my father's among them. And next to his, unveiled that morning, was mine. A hand raised in the crowd. "Ms. Bennett?" a reporter called. "Any final statement before your first official quarter as CEO begins?" I smiled. "No empire built on lies ever lasts. I'm here to build something different." I didn't wait for applause. That night I returned to my office alone. I clicked the lights off, but the moonlight still filtered in. A soft breeze from the open window swept through the room, sending a photo from the side table fluttering to the floor. I picked it up. Me, maybe 10 years old, standing between my parents at a beach. My face, caught in a wide grin. My mother's hand on my shoulder, my father's arm around us both. I stood there, the memory raw but no longer sharp. Then I took a gold pen from my drawer, and carefully, deliberately, drew a frame around myself, not to separate, just to shine. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family, only to rise higher than they ever imagined? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.